Today I want to talk a little bit about coevolution. Now the specific definition is written in your PowerPoint, but here's a short one, which is reciprocal selection between interacting species. And that means that essentially each of these species is going to have an evolutionary selection on the other species, and the interactions can be either antagonistic, as they are going to be in the herbivory example that I'll give you, where herbivores are eating plants in an antagonistic interaction, and the other one could be a mutualistic interaction, where like sometimes in pollination, we have both members benefiting from that interaction. So let's take a look here at how the caterpillar one works. The caterpillars have to have I'll go ahead and highlight, they have a variation in their ability to detoxify the plants. And some of them are really good detoxifiers and some are sort of poor detoxifiers down here. And so there's a variation there. And we can look at the host plants as well, and we're going to look on their axis. We're looking at toxicity of the plants. Some of those plants are going to be very toxic over here on this side, and some are going to be less toxic. So in order for evolution to occur, we return to our basics here. The trait has to be heritable, it has to be variable, and which we see in this case, if it is genetic, which we have some good reasons to believe the ability to detoxify compounds is genetic. And then we have differential survivorship associated with the trait. And that usually turns out to be that caterpillars have to have a shortage of food. So there can't just be food everywhere for them. And so that means they're competing in some way to get enough food to eat. Otherwise, they would just move around to another plant, which is kind of complicated for caterpillars, but we can talk about that, I guess. Let's take a look at what happens on the other side then, is we have to have these caterpillars are going to preferentially, they're going to feed on the plants that taste the best. And so what we're going to have is we're going to have caterpillars eat tasty plants. So that means that they are going to have a lot of selection against these guys, and which is essentially selection for these plants on this side. All right, and that means that in the plant case, we're going to have their trait is going to be heritable, which we have good reason to believe that toxicity is, at least to some degree, heritable. It's got to be variable, which it is in my demonstration here, and it also has to cause differential survivorship. That means caterpillars actually have to make a difference. That means caterpillars do affect plants, and this is kind of interesting because they are only eating the leaves. They're not actually eating the reproductive parts, but they can eat enough leaves that the plants actually suffer. So what we're going to do is we're going to select against this part of the plant over here, so that the ones that are more likely to survive in the plants will be these on this side, and that means that in the next generation we have an increase in the average toxicity of those plants from X1 to X2, and that's the plant changing. And as the plants change, that's going to affect the caterpillars. So we go back up to the caterpillars, and those toxic plants are going to have a selection against, and we can put these guys selection against these that are not so good at detoxifying over here. So this is going to be selection against and selection for those that can detoxify. And so as a result, caterpillars will survive better in this category, and they too will shift. So they'll move up here to their new X bar 2 to the right. And so what ends up happening is these two organisms, in theory, have this reciprocal selection that results in continuous change. Plants get really toxic and caterpillars get really good at detoxifying plants. So the end result is what we call an evolutionary arms race. Now the evolutionary arms race, which results in very toxic plants and herbivores with strong detoxifying abilities. Now, We can look at something like the monarch and see that, because that's a very, very toxic plant. But we can also see that a large percentage, like 10 or 12% of our pharmaceuticals or biologically active compounds that we get from plants. And when they come in from plants, probably those plants have been historically under selection by the herbivores that ate them. So you can see these notes in the lecture support for coevolution. And now you know why they look so messy like this, because they weren't messy when they started. Now this is again coevolution via antagonistic herbivore-host interaction. Let's take another look at mutualism next.